Hello, Marvel fans, Marvel geeks, and all the nerds in between. My name is Megan with Vigilante Vibes, where I talk all things Marvel, all Marvel comics, MCU, Marvel Studios, all that amazing stuff. So today I want to talk about another mutant that I feel like just does not get the credit they deserve for who they are as a character. I didn't know where to end that sentence, but today I want to talk about Pete Wisdom. Pete showed up in Excalibur number 86 and was created by Warren Ellis and Ken Lashley. Something interesting to know about Peter Wisdom is that it's said that he's a self-insert of Warren Ellis. So basically, Warren wrote himself as Pete. It's said that. So, I mean, I haven't seen anyone say it's not true. So, take that for what it is. Peter Wisdom grew up in London, England, and is the son of DCI Harold Wisdom of the New Scotland Yard. His mom was murdered by the serial killer Michael Ryan while she was waiting for Pete, who didn't show because they'd had an argument. Ever since, he's carried the guilt of her death. I would too. I would blame him. So, when he was younger and basically MI6's rising star, Pete was in love with a girl named Sari. He was shooting up the ranks and promised her he wouldn't let the job get in the way of their relationship, which is always famous last words. You never say that because that's exactly what's going to happen. He ended up joining Black Air, even though Sari could not stand them. Later on, Sari, who'd become an assassin, got hired to kill the queen, and when she failed, Pete shocked her by turning her over to Black Air. He actually did it because he cared about her and hoped she'd get the help in rehab. During this time with Black Air, Pete saw and did some truly horrific things. At one point, they sent him to New York to steal the still beating heart of an immortal worshipped by a doomsday cult. He expected to find the place empty, but instead walked into a whole cult, animals included, dead from poisoning themselves days earlier, which I feel like cults tend to do. It's normal cult behavior. When terrorists took over the medieval-looking fortress on British territory in Antarctica called Cold Grey, Pete was dispatched and he wiped out the entire group, even though he knew they were family men. So, Pete eventually crossed paths with Excalibur thanks to Black Air, which had become interested because of the connection between Brian Braddock's father and his special type of ammo made from a Genoshan mutate's skin. After that, he ended up fighting against Black Air, including his old rival Scratch. Around the same time, he started dating Shadowcat, which is Kitty Pryde or Kate Pryde or whatever she goes by now. Which Lockheed definitely did not approve of. Lockheed, if you don't know, Lockheed is the Kitty Pryde's dragon that I think I actually have one here. One second. I do. If you're watching on YouTube, you actually see Lockheed. If you're listening to the audio, this is really awkward. Sorry. Some of the team worried Kitty was going to get hurt by him. Then her ex Colossus, who'd just left the Acolytes, showed up on Muir Island to find her. He happened to see her with Pete and, not being in a great headspace, attacked him out of nowhere. They fought, and Colossus nearly beat Pete to death, leaving him in a wheelchair for a while. Even though Pete was drunk and caught off guard, he fought back hard enough that Colossus ended up in critical condition too. That's okay. Well, at least you stood your ground. After his time with Kitty, Pete ran into X-Force in Genosha. Not long after, he set up his own independent spy network meant to keep the world's intelligence agencies in check regarding how they treated mutants. He met with Alastair Stewart to talk about Black Air's human rights abuses, especially against mutants, and revealed he'd blown up a secret service lab that had been dissecting warpies, blaming Stewart for not shutting it down when he had been in charge. Pete eventually became the new leader and mentor of X-Force, now wearing an eye patch just for the aesthetic. Like, he just wanted the vibe. At one point, he even seemed to be killed by the genetic terrorist Dr. Niles Roman, though it later turned out to be a fake out. He later went back to work for British intelligence. When Alastair Stewart learned a Martian invasion was coming, he decided to shut down the department and fold it into an MI6 for access for more resources. Because the intel was classified, he didn't warn Pete ahead of time. Pete took it personally and went straight to Parliament and the Ministry of Defense to argue that he should be given authority over all the weird happenings in Britain. He managed to convince them, and that's how he ended up running his own agency, MI13. Because of secrecy and interdepartmental drama, Alistair wasn't allowed to explain why he'd left. So the agency, with the knowledge of the invasion, was suddenly completely separate from the agency with the power to act on it, which that's unfortunate. Pete was one of the mutants who kept their powers after M-Day. Soon after, he teamed up with Captain Britain, Sage, Juggernaut, Nocturne, Dazzler, and others to fight Shadow X, evil versions of the original X-Men and their mentor from an alternate reality. After that, Pete pushed to bring Excalibur back together with that same lineup, even getting the Home Secretary to formally clear Juggernaut of any crimes on UK soil so he could officially be part of the team. From there, Pete became MI13's field commander. Early on, he ended up in an arranged marriage with a rogue fairy named Tink to seal a truce and stop a fairy invasion of Earth. That did not last long, since he quickly started sleeping with another MI13 operative, Maureen Raven. Their relationship also fell apart, and after Maureen dumped him, Pete was forced to kill her in order to close a portal the Martian Masters had used for her to open. Pete fought during the Skrulls' secret invasion, trying to stop them from destroying the Siege Perilous and invading Avalon alongside the rest of MI13. Later, during Norman Osborn's Dark Reign, Dracula launched an invasion on Britain using a vampire army from a base on the moon. Pete ultimately outplayed Dracula and wiped out his forces. How many people can say that they took out Dracula? Pete's kind of a scumbag, but that's pretty cool. He also got tangled up with Gambit in a heist involving Excalibur. It turned out to be a setup by Borea Sitch, who had Gambit on an explosive leash to break into MI13's massive weapons storage. Gambit outsmarted Sitch and helped Pete get the arsenal back and arrest Sitch's people. Later, Gambit cashed in that favor during a prison raid, which ended with Gambit being killed by Sitch for a short time. No one's ever dead. Ever. Except, like, Karen Page, Uncle Ben, Marvel. This isn't about them. In retaliation, Pete executed Sitch on the spot. Eventually, Pete became wrapped up with Coven Aqaba as part of the MI13 duties, especially as the Coven grew in influence after Betsy Braddock became the new Captain Britain, a final act of free will before Morgan Le Fay took control of her brother. Pete found himself torn between loyalty to Britain and loyalty to mutant kind, and he seemed to choose Britain, leaving the Hellfire Gala with Coven Aqaba. But the Coven betrayed him and sacrificed him to free Morgan Le Fay from Jamie Braddock, the new mutant king of Avalon. Pete was brought back on Krakoa by the Five, which, I have to make a video about the Five because it's so interesting, and I would love to see a comic book run of the Five, but I also feel like a lot of past writers have used the Five to just kind of like a Band-Aid, I'd say. But that's fine. And now that Britain no longer recognized the island as a nation of Krakoa, he realized going home or returning to MI13 was not an option. So he had the Five resurrect the old Strike PSI division and help him defend Krakoa. Now that you know all about good old Pete's story, what exactly is his powers? Peter is a mutant, so what's his mutant ability? Pete can soak up heat from the environment as well as sunlight and then fire that stored energy from his fingertips as the semi-solid blast he calls hot knives. They're basically pure thermal energy, supposedly as hot as the surface of the sun. He can also shape them into shields that burn up incoming missiles or use the heat to create lift underneath him so when he's falling, he doesn't hit the ground as hard. Pete can launch his hot Pete can launch his hot knives like projectiles and keep them extended from his fingers like claws when he's fighting up close. He's got really precise control over them too, able to either cause massive damage or just knock someone out. He can change the size of how many knives he's producing at once. And if he focuses, he can make one of those knives stick around longer than the others. So that's Pete Wisdom. I don't know. Hot knives gets me every time. So let's talk about some comics that you can check out to get to know Pete Wisdom even better. Obviously, you have to read Pride and Wisdom, number 1 through 3, which is Kitty Pryde and Pete Wisdom, Excalibur 86 through 114, and Wisdom 1 through 6. So, with that being said, I hope you learned something today. I hope you check out those comics because he's a cool character, and I hope you will like and subscribe. With that being said, have a marvelous day.